Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Dennis. I'm a sociolinguist and a language specialist. What are the most widespread myths about bilingualism? Let's find out now. So, myth number 1. Bilingualism is a rare phenomenon. That's wrong. It has been estimated that more than half of the world's population are bilingual. In other words, they speak 2 or more languages on an everyday basis. Therefore, it's not surprising that bilingualism can be found practically in every part of the world, at all levels of society and in all age groups. It has actually existed for centuries. If you don't believe me, ask your grandma. And if we take the United States, for example, there are as many as 50 million bilingual people living there. So even in countries that may seem monolingual, the percentage of bilinguals can be high. What's interesting, not only are there bilingual countries, but there are bilingual, or rather multilingual cities. Take for example Manchester. There are approximately 200 languages spoken there. Can you imagine 200 languages?
This is amazing.
So check out the place where you live and see how many languages you can hear on the street. Myth number 2. Real bilinguals acquire their 2 languages from birth or in early childhood. That's not correct. One can become bilingual not only in childhood but also in adolescence and even adulthood. So languages can be mastered to a high level even at school. For example, I started learning English when I was 15. I started learning properly. Of course, I had English classes earlier, but due to difficult teenage years, I started realizing that I had to study only when I turned 15. So if you're 15 now and you don't study hard, I think it's high time. Actually, many adults become bilinguals because they have to move from one country to another for education, work, and for all sorts of other reasons. And thus, they are obliged to learn a second language, to learn the language that is spoken in the country. In other words, people become bilingual because life itself forces them to speak 2 languages. And that was the case of my parents, who didn't speak Greek, but they migrated to Cyprus and they both got the job and they had to speak Greek. So they learned the language at work. As they climb, it was quite difficult for them to speak the first 2 or 3 months, but later they had no problem communicating with local Greek Cypriots. Now, both are fluent speakers of Greek and Cypriot Greek dialect. Myth number 3. Bilinguals have equal and perfect knowledge of their 2 languages. That's wrong. In fact, bilinguals know and use their languages in varying proportions depending on the topic, interlocutor, and so on. Some bilinguals are dominant in one language, still others may not be able to read or write in one of the languages that they speak. Still others have only passive knowledge of their language. So they may understand the language, but will use another language to respond. And finally, a very small proportion of people have equal knowledge of their 2 languages. In other words, they have equal fluency in the languages that they use. Do you know such people? For example, I use Russian 90% at home. However, at the university where I work, I use mostly English when I deliver my lectures and when I communicate with my students. Even when I write my emails, I write them in English. Myth number 4. Real bilinguals have no accent in the languages that they speak. That's not true. Having an accent has nothing to do with being bilingual. What's more, having an accent is normal. The main point is to get your message across, to be understood by others, and thus establish effective communication with each other. In fact, some really good, highly fluent bilinguals have an accent in one of the languages that they speak. Take for example the former mayor of California. He has a very strong accent in English. Nonetheless, this does not mean he is not a fluent speaker of English. When it comes to accent, time is a very crucial factor here. The earlier you start learning a second language, the better chances you have to learn it and speak it as a near-native speaker. Say for example Christina Aguilera. She's a fluent speaker of English and Spanish. And finally, myth number 5. Bilinguals are born translators. Haha. Of course that's not true. Even though bilinguals can translate simple things from one language to another, they often have difficulties with more specialized language. The reaction people have is almost always, "But I thought you were bilingual." I was once asked to translate a toast at a Russian party with invited guests from Australia. They were Greeks. To tell you the truth, it was quite awkward because I understood every single word that was said in Russian, but I found it really hard to translate it into Greek. So I ended up translating word for word, which didn't sound good at all. I hope I didn't ruin the party, but like if you've been in a similar situation. In fact, bilinguals use their languages in different situations, with different people, in different domains, use it to discuss different topics. In order to be a good translator, you must undergo a special training to become a good translator. Just as my uncle Alex, who has worked as a translator in India for 20 years, and he actually wanted me to be his successor. I said no. Personally, I find translating very difficult. And I remember my father used to ask me to translate his favorite songs. He's a big fan of rock bands such as Deep Purple, Whitesnake, Scorpions, etc. And when he found out that I more or less understood English and could speak it fairly well, he just asked me, "Son, translate this song for me." Actually, it has always been his dream to be able to understand his favorite songs. But for me, it was a nightmare to sit down and translate word for word, and sometimes the result didn't make sense. Nonetheless, my father was super happy. And I think that was the moment when I understood that I didn't want to become a translator. Alright, let's sum up. Bilingualism is not a rare phenomenon at all. Many people on this planet are speakers of 2 or more languages. Bilinguals can acquire their languages at any point in their life and still become fluent speakers in 2 languages. Bilinguals don't necessarily have equal and perfect knowledge of the languages that they speak. Bilinguals may have an accent in one of the languages that they speak, and that's normal. And finally, bilinguals are not born translators. So if you're a parent, don't ask your child to translate the favorite song for you or the favorite film. Instead, learn the language yourself. It's quite an enjoyable process, believe me. That's all for now. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye!